Okay, I want to deal with this is part 4 of Dumb Atheist Arguments. I'm going to take a little sidetrack here onto a guy. I watched this video today by a user named Venaloid. He's going to try to take on presuppositional apologetics. And he might have other videos. I just saw this one. I want to point some errors out that he makes here. Um, and let's just dive in right here.
Now, the idea of the Christian worldview is that without God, you can't know anything at all. It would be impossible to even have knowledge without God. Now, there are two ways I've heard Christians explain how God's existence means we can trust our thoughts and senses. The first is that the Bible is the only way we can know our thoughts and senses are trustworthy. We read it, we see, oh, God has a plan for us, He wants us to do things. He would necessarily make us able to trust our thoughts and senses in order to carry out His will. Of course, this relies on the assumption that we can read the Bible in the first place, that our thoughts and senses aren't deceiving us as we read the Bible to tell us we can trust our thoughts and senses, which is circular logic. The second way Christians explain how God means we can trust our thoughts is that God, as He created everyone, has programmed into us this innate sense that we can trust our thoughts and senses. And if God didn't exist, we wouldn't have that magical innate programming. And
this magical innate program. Look, see the little dig there? Okay, let's keep going.
We wouldn't be able to know anything. One bad objection I've heard atheists raise is that, well, if God really did give us the ability to trust our thoughts and senses, wouldn't they be perfectly trustworthy since, perfect God, perfect knowledge, all that stuff? Meaning that we would always remember where our keys were. We'd always see exactly what was in front of us, and we'd always think perfectly rationally. Now, not a bad objection necessarily, but there's a few different ways to get out of it.
Not a
worth arguing, so I'm just going to leave it alone. Christians could say that it was because of the fall of man that we sort of got screwed up mentally just a little bit. Or it could be
exactly, Venaloid. That's exactly the Christian position, that when Adam and Eve fell, that is when the human race fell, and now we by nature suppress the knowledge of God. We still have the image of God in us, and we have an innate sense of right and wrong to a degree, and we have an innate sense of the divine being, and we have an innate sense of consciousness. That is the problem with naturalism, that in naturalistic atheism, you can't make objective rational assertions. You can't do it. Okay, I'm not an expert on Eric Hovind's take on presuppositional apologetics. So I'm kind of coming at it from my angle. I don't know if you covered it in another video, but my thing is physical determinism. If naturalistic, because I embrace naturalistic agnosticism. If God, I believe I was like a more naturalistic deist, if you want to say that for a while, or an agnostic kind of. If there's a God out there, there probably is a God, but He just doesn't have anything to do, and it's a closed system. If that is the case, this is a closed system, and everything is cause and effect naturalism. Then you have no I in here. There's no I. There's no self. You cannot affirm any thought. You can't affirm it. You can't say that human thought is objective, because it all would be the result of a process that led up to this moment. Me thinking that I have an objective thought would be as silly as the 8-ball thinking it goes in the right direction after being hit by the cue ball. It's completely determined by the physical process that preceded it. That's the same thing that would be happening in our mind. The neurons firing and all this would all be preceded by a cause and effect that would make my thoughts determined by everything that preceded it. And of course, the I, the self-conscious I, is not is really a delusion in naturalistic atheism. That is the big problem. That's why he's going to say later on, that Christians just dismissed atheists and don't even want to talk to them. No, Christians, from our assumptions, let's keep going here.
See that God gave us the ability to trust our basic thoughts and senses. We didn't go further for some reason, but like I said, not worth arguing. I'm just going to leave it as is, except that God gave us this ability and just leave it, go from there. Okay, now back to the main accusation. Atheists cannot know if their thoughts and senses are trustworthy, and there are two ways I've heard Christians explain this. The first is that you, Venaloid, cannot know that your thoughts and senses are trustworthy.
Yes.
And you know what I do when they raise that point? I say, okay, great. You've just shown me that I cannot trust my thoughts and senses. What are you going to do to me now? You're going to try to prove to me that God exists now because as an atheist I can't trust my thoughts and senses? Well, if I can't trust my thoughts and senses, how can I conclude that there is a God? I can't trust my thoughts. You've just removed me from the conversation. And all the Christians who raise this point this way do is remove atheists from the conversation, which I guess does help them because they don't have to talk to the atheists anymore. They just sort of get an excuse to ignore them.
No, Venaloid, that's not what the presuppositionalist is saying. The presuppositionalist Christian is saying is you don't have, from your perspective, from the atheist perspective, you don't have the right to be in the conversation. You don't have the right because you're trying to come in and assume that we have a self-conscious, that we have objective thought, that you can make an objectively right statement and an objectively wrong statement. You can have objective thinking outside of the physical cause and effect unit, which you can't do it in naturalistic atheism. You can't have something outside the system. And on your basis, from your foundation, you don't have the right to be in the conversation. You don't. You don't have the right. That is what the presupposition is saying. Now, in the Christian view, you are a person made in the image of God. You're fallen, just like me, just like everybody. Of course, I believe I'm redeemed. I believe you're not redeemed. You are suppressing the knowledge of God, and until you accept God, then in the gospel, and the Spirit of God comes in and opens your eyes, and you repent, you will not be thinking clearly. That is the from my perspective. But from my perspective, as I reason with you, the Spirit of God could be using my words to open your eyes so that you see the truth. Okay, that is the point that the presupposition is making. Let's keep going here.
But a curious Christian could raise the exact same objections that we atheists do all the time. In fact, that's how a lot of Christians become atheists, is by being curious and raising what you would think of as an atheist kind of objection.
Yeah. I went from a naturalist agnostic by raising these questions of your worldview, which it just implodes. The whole thing implodes. So let's keep going here.
So, putting it this way, saying that you can't trust your thoughts doesn't really help the Christian case at all, who's trying to do presuppositional apologetics in this way. The second way I've heard Christians talk about this, which is the correct way, is to say that if atheism is true, then you wouldn't be able to know if you could trust your thoughts. This is the correct way of talking to an atheist about this, because otherwise you're kicking them out of the conversation, not proving God to him at all. And like I said, a curious Christian could raise the same objections. This type of debate, an if-then statement, allows for an actual discussion. Now, at this point, some atheists try to justify that they can trust their thoughts and senses using their thoughts and senses, which is circular logic. They'll say that, for example, we can do double-blind experiments to see if I remember what I just saw, or if I can do basic rational math and stuff like that. But, of course, that is using, like I said, your senses to verify your senses, which is circular logic. So, in fact, you cannot verify that your senses are accurate using experiments which require the use of your senses. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yeah, atheists cannot know that their thoughts and senses are trustworthy. But what about Christians?
And he's going to talk about how, well, what if God put us in a matrix or God let us be in a matrix, and what about delusional people and all this? God said we're not in a matrix. That is so. There's so many problems with the naturalist view. It just implodes on itself. You cannot affirm any type of objective, rational thought. Any rational statement. You can't affirm anything because there's no. Again, like I said, physical determinism makes it so that there is no I, there's no me in here. This is I'm just the culmination of a process that is climaxed to this point. And maybe we'll deal with more of Mr. Venaloid here in the next video. All right, God bless.